Hi, I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is the first Vinyl Monday of 2026! Welcome, everyone, to a new year of Vinyl Monday. This is my series where I talk about the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. I am shocked I got that in one take after 3 weeks of not saying that on camera. If TV show length episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds, here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. Ooh, also got that in one take. 2025's double album December was completely derailed for a myriad of reasons, some of which were my eyes not working, others were my ears not working, and other reasons were actually really great. I got in contact with people that I am going to be interviewing in the new year. You will see one of those interviews here on my channel, and the other is over on my podcast. Emma got us an amazing first guest for our first episode back, which will be January 23rd? Yes, Friday, January 23rd. There will also definitely be one more Groovy Music Club piece up by me by this week. I believe it will be the Nico discography overview. I don't know for sure. I'm filming this like a week and a half in advance. My editor could have picked my other piece to go up first. I guess that counts for our usual beginning of the episode announcement. This week's album was supposed to be a double album December pick. I'm covering it now because I did not want to skip over it. This is total Abby music. You know, like this is Abby music. This is Abby music. This is also Abby music. And this week's album is Can Tago Mago. Congrats if you guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my post tab. That's where I post the hints to what the next album is gonna be. I make announcements like my recent cameo appearance in An Absurd Existence's latest MF Doom video. I love a good side quest. I host polls. You can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written versions of my reviews on my website, linked in the description. All right, for the first time in the new year, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is a repress. If the date on the back cover is to be believed, this is from 2014. I bought my copy of Tago Mago at Garosa Records in Brookfield, Connecticut. They're generally overpriced as hell, but you really can't argue with the selection. They have like a wall of mo-fi pressings, and not like on the wall as like an oh sh wall kind of deal. Their oh sh wall is like $2,000 copies of albums. I'm talking a wall of stacks to flip through that were just mo-fi pressings. Their selection is bar none. You can't really argue with the price. They had a good little selection of prog and krautrock for me, and as B-roll Abby will be showing you right about now, this is on orange vinyl. In the words of Bridget Hayden for The Wire, without knowing who Can were, what krautrock meant, and with no idea of their musical affinity with my new associates, I plumped for it entirely due to the cover. A perfect portrait of my state of being, a face made of flames spewing forth the unadulterated primal mulch of the unconscious mind. Bang on. What more could I hope for from an album if this picture was anything to go by? This abstracted woodblock print that we see on the front and back covers and on the inside of the gatefold are all by Uli Eichberger. Is it someone smoking? A mushroom cloud? The band themselves nicknamed it the Kotzkopf. Translation: puking head. The image is non-specific enough to be the space between, like finding shapes in clouds. It gives the viewer the space for them to impart their own meaning, which is a big part of what Can's music was about. Opening up the gatefold, the cover image is this time in blue, and we've got some shots of the band. On Tago Mago, we have the second lineup of Can. That's Michael Caroli on guitar and violin, Ermin Schmidt on keys, electronics, and vocalizations on Ohm, Holger Chuke on bass and managing tape edits and effects, Jackie Liebezeit on drums, double bass, and piano, and Damo Suzuki on vocals. Our special guests include Ermin's dog Asi, providing vocals on Ohm. The young daughter of Ulrich Ruckreim, the sculptor in the studio upstairs, can also be heard on this track. Tago Mago was produced by Can, engineered by Holger Chuke. Roll transition. Yeah, fair warning, my German pronunciation is going to be dire. My friend, podcast co-host, and Stuttgart native Emma tried her very best, but I think I'm just a lost cause. My regional accent just does not jive with the vowel sounds, and like most of the consonants too, but you know what they say. Two can'ts make a can. This is a very different group for Vinyl Monday. Rock and roll is thought of as a young man's sport. Pretty much all of the bands I typically talk about were either my age or younger, cutting their greatest albums. Most of the guys in Can, though, were over the age of 30 when they started playing together and had professional careers. They were also kind of outliers of krautrock in this sense. Now, to call Can krautrock wouldn't entirely be accurate. Can had plenty of players circling in and out of their group in their history that were not German. Their first singer was American. The singer on this album was Japanese. And bassist Holger Chuke was effectively stateless. He was born in Danzig, now part of modern-day Poland, but when he was born, it was its own city-state. When Danzig was taken over by the Nazis, yes, we are getting into some pretty hefty World War II history in this episode. Holger's grandfather changed the family name to a Dutch name so they could escape persecution. When Holger joined Can, he changed his surname back to Chuke. Now, it may seem like we got into the weeds there, but I promise you, the state of post-war Berlin Wall-era Germany is essential to krautrock and Can. While the counterculture here in America was concerned with our involvement in Vietnam, the counterculture youth in Germany were focused on university reform. More specifically, they were focused on adult involvement in the Nazi regime. John Weinscheidel of Amanjul II said, quote, "In the 60s in Germany, we had a very special generation conflict. The generation before us experienced the Nazis and war times. After the war, there was a completely different political climate, but in many institutions, the old smell was still present." Michael Caroli's dad was an accountant for the SS. That's difficult to reckon with. And Ermin Schmidt was expelled from college for the most badass reason I've ever heard, publishing a regular column in his school paper calling out former Nazis on the school staff. Ermin said the catastrophe of war became the, quote, black heart of the music of Can, and when you look at their influences, world music, avant-garde, free jazz, minimalism, futurism, Dada, it's all the stuff the mustache man hated. Can held this shared ethos of krautrock, but they never felt connected to krautrock. The term in and of itself came from either the melody maker, John Peel, or Virgin Records, which are all antithetical to the genre's other desire, to distance German music from the influences of British and American music. Schlager, the term for German pop music around this time. It was aggressively apolitical, and a lot of it was covers of British and American pop tunes. Holger said, quote, "Our environment is your music, and thus we were a German group. If you live in the desert, you'll make a music that's different from if you lived in a rainforest. We lived near Cologne, an area with a lot of industrial sounds and beautiful scenery." But when asked by K. Martin if he felt Can were part of some overall German movement, he said, "In a way, yet the feeling of wanting independence, especially from other groups, was dominant." Now that we know what krautrock is and a little bit of what Can are about, let's introduce them as individual musicians. Ermin Schmidt was a student, through and through. He studied under 3 giants of avant-garde music, most of which we've mentioned on this series before: Karlheinz Stockhausen, Luciano Berio, and John Cage. Ehrman also took drum lessons from Steve Reich and Lamont Young. He studied the French horn, the piano. He was a choir director on his way to being a conductor before Cannes. But at a certain point, he realized, quote, "There was nothing I had in common with the classical music audience." Bassist Holger Czukay also studied under Stockhausen. He wanted to merge his contemporary influences, most of the same as Ehrman's, with world music and free jazz. Jackie Liebezeit was a jazz drummer who played with Chet Baker. He ventures into free jazz and Manfred Schuf's group, but he finds they're a little too free for him. Jackie noticed he could play literally whatever he wanted, and Schuf wouldn't notice. The only guy in the core lineup of Cannes who consistently listened to rock and roll music was guitarist Michael Caroli. He took guitar lessons under Holger and introduced him to the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix. He left law school to be in Cannes. Quote, "We began without any concept. Our only idea was to find a concept in making music altogether spontaneously, in a collective way, without any leader." Now, they weren't a commune like the original iteration of Amon Jewel, but Cannes were a total collective. Nobody composes, but we all invent. If there were a thesis statement to Cannes, that would be it. They never credited their work by a principal songwriter. It was always Cannes or the guys' names. All the money they made went into one shared pool, and save for the out-of-reach LP, everyone got the same share in royalties. Royalties that came from their songs appearing on soundtracks. Now, it's interesting to note that around the time Cannes are immersing themselves in the worlds of theater and film, playing for 3 months in a production of Prometheus, scoring Deadlock and Deep End, their songs in a handful of pornos, recording their first album, Monster Movie, and putting out album 1.5 soundtracks. At the same time as all of this, over in England, Pink Floyd are scoring Zabriskie Point and staging whatever the hell the Man in the Journey was. To be clear, Cannes and Floyd not affiliated with each other, but it's very cool to see contemporaneous explorations of the film world. One major difference here. In 1971, the year Pink Floyd put out Metal, they played 69 shows. That same year, while Cannes were recording Tago Mago, they only played 15 shows. Cannes' first singer Malcolm Mooney, on Monster Movie and some of soundtracks, has to leave the band to address some mental health issues. Before a gig in Munich, the band found their new singer in the form of a busker who just so happened to have set up outside the club. A young Japanese man named Damo Suzuki. A nomad and self-described anarchist, Damo wandered through a commune in Sweden and Ireland before eventually finding himself in West Germany, Munich to be exact, in 1970-ish. He couldn't really speak English, instead making up nonsense words that sounded like they could be English when he sang. Rob Young's text describes Damo's first gig with Cannes as a surreal encounter in which he screamed at concert goers and cleared the room, save for about 30 Americans who were somehow vibing with the whole thing. But Damo admitted in an interview in 2004 that he never really considered himself a part of the band. Quote, "I was part of the band, but actually not really part of the Cannes, because for me, it didn't matter. It's just something that happens, because I was just a hippie. I didn't really have any kind of opinions." Damo was interested in Dadaism. As a little refresher course, Dada originated in post-World War I Europe and experienced a resurgence in the 60s and 70s among the children of World War II. It makes sense. Dada artists thought that if the horrors of war were rational and good, then they'd counter that with irrationality and randomness. If you were to write them down, or even work out what the hell he's singing, Damo's lyrics might read like a Dada poem. Writing something out, cutting each line, putting them in a hat, shaking them up, and singing them as you pull them out. Damo said, I can't sing, so I use my voice as an instrument. I'm not so much interested about anything in particular. That's why I'm singing about nothing. I improvise melody and texture too, so I don't concentrate on one thing. Sometimes it sounds like English, French, or German, but really, it is the language of the Stone Age. A singer committed to the art of singing nothing is kind of perfect for Can. Ehrman said, whenever you use words for your music, you start labeling it. This is firmly a Can without a label. Tago Mago was the last album Can recorded in the Schloss Norvenneck in 1970. If Can were a living organism, as many an author have described it, then Schloss Norvenneck, and the inner space later on, was the mitochondria. The powerhouse of the cell. Having their own studio space was absolutely necessary for Can and their music. The very essence of what they did relied on them spending hours on the same riff or chord. These guys didn't compose a track, develop it, rehearse it, and record. Songs were organisms too, and they took time to grow. They got their space at Schloss, German for castle, Norvenneck, thanks to a Picasso exhibit they played at. But this isn't a self-built recording studio that we might think of. Say Twickenham when the Beatles were recording Get Back. There is no defined studio and control room at Schloss Norvenneck. The studio was the control room. All Can had by way of recording was 2 Revox tape recorders, a mixing desk, and 5 mics, 3 of which went to the drums. Can's truly unique creative process shaped how their music came out, Tago Mago included. Rob Young said, quote, "The music itself was the concept. Text became texture, submerged into the whole, not a message tossed to the world on the crest of a sound wave." The guys showed up to the Schloss around 10 a.m. Someone would start playing a motif, or maybe put a record on. Maybe Ehrman would explain the plot of a film Can were scoring, since he was the one flying back and forth managing those projects. One would start improvising, and they would chase it for hours. Holger would then cut up the tape from the first session. This is very similar to what Teo Macero and Miles Davis were doing with In a Silent Way, and another total Abbey music album, Bitches Brew. Holger said that Bitches Brew was a very big influence. That was when jazz became interesting and calculable. It became a thing where you could say yes or no instead of becoming so free that you don't know what yes or no is. But since the studio and the control room were the same thing and their equipment was pretty primitive by 1971 standards, Can didn't have a 16-track machine until 1974. They would play this edited first tape over their PA system and record right over it. This is a crazy manner of overdubbing, which Holger would again cut up into a new tape. This produced stuff that was impossible to reproduce live, and which Alan Warner pointed out was ironically movie-like for a band that scored movies. You're effectively manufacturing the narrative, like assembling scenes that were shot non-consecutively. As you can imagine, Can used a lot of tape working like this, so while they could spend hours and hours on one thing, they couldn't really f around. Can's objective was to close the circuit as soon as possible, find the groove, chase it, and make something meaningful. Duncan Followell, a rare outsider who got to sit in on Tago Mago sessions, remembered, "I just sat there, hour after hour, rather contentedly drinking it in and making very little comment, because they were working. The atmosphere was very subdued with the work in progress. No screechy groupies, no silly drunken episodes, nobody flipping out. It's very subdued and almost zen-like." Tago Mago was intended as a single LP, but band manager and Ehrman's wife Hildegard strongly advised they expand to 2. Both the label and the guys resisted at first. Ehrman said, "We thought she was mad," but it made sense. Their stuff bordered on fluxus, the art of the moment. Quote, "She made the point that this music, things like Peking O and Om, all of this were Can too. We were recording this material just the same." Sides 1, 3, and 4 were recorded chronologically. What became side 2, Hallelujah, was assembled from several takes recorded through the whole of the Tago Mago recording process. As for the album title, if I had a nickel for every time Aleister Crowley was mentioned on this series, I'd have a handful of nickels, and most of them came from Jimmy Page. This one doesn't, but it comes with a big fat asterisk. Can like to tell tall tales about supernatural things that allegedly happened to them. Of course the music press ate this right up. Tago Mago is named after Tago Mago Island off the coast of Ibiza, where Crowley supposedly visited. Supposedly, Ehrman was into all that stuff around this time. Jackie lived in Ibiza for a time in the mid-60s and would have been the one aware of this island. The track listing of Tago Mago goes as follows. Opening up disc 1, we have Paper House, followed by Mushroom, and side 1 closes with Oh Yeah. Taking up all of side 2 and closing disc 1 is Hallelujah. Opening up disc 2 and taking up all of side 3 is Om. Opening side 4 is Peking O, and the album closes with Bring Me Coffee or Tea. Tago Mago was released in August of 1971. Promo single Turtles Have Short Legs, backed with a shortened, very shortened Hallelujah, was released back in March as the album was supposed to be out way earlier. But there was significant drama surrounding the release of Tago Mago. In July, Can sued ex-manager Abi Ofarim for failing to fulfill their contract, translation basically being a terrible manager and not doing his job. Abi launched a joint countersuit and restraining order, which delayed Tago Mago's release. This case dragged on for several years, affecting several other album releases. Damo also got in pretty big trouble with the law. He was arrested in Hamburg for working without a permit back in 1969. He was rearrested in 71 and threatened with deportation this time. His bandmates immediately went to bat for him, getting plenty of reference letters from quite powerful figures in West Germany. Even Karl-Heinz Stockhausen himself wrote an open letter urging authorities to release Damo. Quote, I would now like to urgently request that you do not lump such artists as Damo and Can alongside criminals and parasites. Society dearly needs birds like these. Perhaps you do not care for beat music or pop music, but maybe your children do. This group is the finest in Germany at the moment. Do not clean out the stables on account of any inbred German love of regulations as if it were 30 years ago. Love of regulations of 30 years ago, of course, referring to the Nazis. It seems Can's connections made it all the way up to high-ranking officials in the West German government, and a very thankful Damo was released to his bandmates and allowed to stay in Germany. Now, do you remember Floyd's little tiff with Michael Watts over his Melody Maker review of Metal? They sent him the boxing glove on the spring and all, like the gaggle of teenage boys they effectively were at heart. Watts dragged Floyd again in his review of Tago Mago! While Metal was, quote, placidity and unadventurousness from Floyd, Tago Mago was curious and far out. But Michael complained about not getting, quote, the impression that there's any deep sense of the spirit of rock and roll in the music. No shit, Sherlock. That's the point of krautrock. In December of 1971, a significant change to Can's environment and therefore creative process came. The Schloss's limitations were becoming harder and harder to ignore. Other artists in residence were getting disturbed by Can's hours-long sessions. Often they'd migrate out into the stairwell, which was, great for the acoustics, but loud as hell for everyone else. So they rented an old movie theater, stapled their sheets and mattresses to the walls again for insulation, and dubbed it the new Inner Space. First album they cut there was Ege Bam Yasi. At least I think that's how it's said. I've never heard anyone say this. Can and Tago Mago influenced Sex Pistol John Lydon and his new Public Image Limited. Obviously, Julian Cope, he wrote a whole text on krautrock, and the Tago Mago passage is like a fixture of it. Brian Eno, everything I talk about on this channel either comes back to Eric Clapton or him. Sonic Youth, who recorded Spoon for the Sacrilege album. Portishead, and of course, fellow Messiaen devotees, Radiohead. Tago Mago is now some rich guy's private island, a much more satisfying conclusion. The Schloss is now a museum. So, what do I think of Tago Mago? Addison Rae Breakover. Tago Mago, the mysterious, magical island. It invokes something earthy, exotic, esoteric. These are all feelings the guys wanted to invoke with their music. We also have to take a look at the band name here, Can. The ability to do something, can do. A container, a can of something. Simple, utilitarian, can the verb. You know, canning things to make pickles. You preserve something. I first heard of Can and Tago Mago through Neil Halstead's Baker's Dozen list for the quietest. I knew 10 of his 13 picks, and considering my music taste seems to be a copy-paste of that guy's, I figured I would like the other 3. About Tago Mago, this is what he said. It sounded really familiar, especially the drums, because they were so influential on lots of other bands I liked, but I was like, oh, fuck. These are the people who invented that. We spent a lot of time driving around in Slowdive bassist Nick Chaplin's car. He was the only person who drove at that point, listening to stuff. This was an album we played a lot. Oddly enough, that was pretty much my first experience with Tago Mago, just with a different cast of characters. I put all of Neil's picks into this massive playlist called Bible. Because duh. On the car trip to celebrate my 24th birthday, I hit shuffle. I think this was southbound on I-91 when Hallelujah came on, and I went, oh, what the hell is this? Ever erudite, my buddy Michael said, this is weed music. Can just so happens to be Japanese slang for the green stuff, so he wasn't that far off, weirdly. Marcus of No Dogs in Space used the phrase, the sound above, to describe Can's music. It's something that deliberately challenges you, the sound above the level you're on. After continually immersing myself and challenging myself with the sound above, I can. Bridget Hayden had a similar sound above experience. At home on my own, I skipped through a few tracks, but now I was supposed to like it. It seemed opaque, a high wall, so there it stayed on the shelf like an educational Christmas present. Through my research, I found that Marcus, Bridget, and Rob Young had all come to the same conclusion. Can shared a way of doing, but their modus operandi as a group was to break from musical conventions. It makes sense that musicians who remembered Nazi-era Germany would not be down with rigidity or too many rules. That's why communes like the Kommune 1, think the Yippies meet the White Panthers, and the OG Amon Jul formed. Nothing was certain while making Tago Mago, not even the backing track. It would be cut up, or the direction it was played would be changed. There's a lot of backward stuff on Tago Mago. The 6th member of Can was Holger's X-Acto knife. Like jazz, freedom is found in the repetition. Julian Cope said it's a brutally simplistic trip. One more note before I begin this analysis. As this stuff is mostly instrumental, I'm going to be referring to a lot of timestamps. We simply do not have our usual markers of when things happen in songs, like lyrics or even a change from a verse to a chorus. Having these timestamps will be helpful for you to know what I am hearing, especially with all these edits. Right off the bat, we have evidence of very obvious tape editing on Tago Mago. This reverberated guitar string scratch is the same one we hear opening disc 2. Paper House has a defined ABA structure. Your core motif, or head, the improv section in the middle, and the head again. This Head is a sparse but fuzzy waltz anchored by the drums. And I have no clue what the first line of the record is. There's no lyric sheet included with Tago Mago. Not like it would help anyway. Devoe didn't really sing lyrics as he performed vocalizations. You can impart your own meaning on them. Alan Warner said, quote, "With Devoe, you can imagine profanity, or you can imagine a prayer." I can make out the second line. Up, down, think anything. What you feel is all gone. This is about the psychedelic experience, yes. It applies to the experience of Tago Mago too. With this and albums like it, you have to divorce yourself from the idea of a linear timeline, which is really hard to do. I got the most out of this album when I put away clocks and I turned off my phone while listening. With each pass, something new comes up, like the second obvious cut heading into the second verse, Ermin's never-ending keyboard trill, or the sheer amount of overdubs, especially on the drums. Jackie is a fantastic drummer on his own, dexterous with really smooth rolls. Sorry, I hit my pendant. Just broke my pendant. With his editing, Holger has transformed Jackie's playing into something that is impossible to replicate. Oh, I just did that backwards. Impossible to replicate in the round. You have something that can only exist within the confines of this record. There we go. And then you have Devoe, who is not a traditional frontman by any sense of the word. The music doesn't happen behind him, right? He can do something totally different. He blended his voice into the textures of the music. His barely audible whispers in the middle section, for example, it draws you in. This is why he was such a great singer for Can. He's another cog with the players. The drums shift into Motorik in this middle section, the German word for motor skill, that tight, regimented, quick 4/4 that certain krautrock groups like to use. Not all. Krautrock is not an umbrella. This is very different from this, which is very different from this, which is different from that or that. The middle section is all guitar exercises from Michael, long and short, textured and smooth, free-flowing and tight. I've heard this manufactured solo described as searing, screaming. I disagree with those adjectives. This isn't an Eddie Hazel solo on Maggot Brain, right? Showboating isn't the point of Paper House. It's a brilliant song and one of my favorites because of all the little pieces, the little moments that come together, like a flare here or indecipherable Devoe shout there. They build the tension. It releases with a hard cut at 5 minutes, a watery free flow to build upon again. Paper House flawlessly transitions into Mushrooms, so smooth that I thought this was one long backing track cut in one go, but I missed the cut. This is the shortest song on the LP, clocking in at just over 4 minutes. I've also heard Can and Tago Mago described as funky. I also disagree with that. Can's got too much weight for that classification, and not enough of that weight is placed on the downbeat. I do see where the comparison comes from. This gets mucky like Maggot Brain, or There's a Riot Going On. But where Riot is claustrophobic and dense because Sly re-recorded over the same tape like 15 times, Mushroom is roomy. It's the opposite. There's a lot of space to dive into. This is because A, the drums don't really change through the whole song. Jackie called this his monotonous style. B, this drum sound was captured in a cavernous room in a literal castle, then re-recorded over a PA in the same room. You can literally hear the snare sound bounce off the wall. And C, the guitar, bass, and whispered vocals create textures around all of that. When I saw Mushroom Head, I was born and I was dead. Sure, ego death. But the next line, when I saw skies are red, I was born and I was dead, and Devoe's screamed lines point towards nuclear warfare. One can't help but think of the A-bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The horrors of World War II and its aftermath had serious influence on krautrock including the players who weren't from Germany. Mushroom ends with a short passage of this compressed effect. An explosion takes us into Oh Yeah. The rhythm track of Oh Yeah was ran backwards. Then the guys played and Damo sang over that backwards track. They ran that tape backwards as well. There would be no Kid A without Oh Yeah. I remember Can coming up in my research for that episode, but I have no idea why this specific song didn't come up. It's the same groove, the same flirting with early electronic music and Messiaen, and the chord change and bass line around 5 minutes and 23 seconds is so OK Computer or Kid A. There's 8 or 9 edits in this tape, some more obvious than others. The most obvious is the cut at 2 minutes 28 seconds to the guitar or bass string detuning. It could be either one. The cut at 3 minutes and 5 seconds is disguised by another explosion effect. Oh Yeah is a perfect example of Damo's Dada lyrics. I have no idea what he's singing reversed, but in Japanese he sings, "The crazy guy sitting alone over there pisses from the top of rainbows, we call him our pimp. We leave the LSD town, and fearing hungry ghosts, we take it as a lucky thing that morning still won't come." This translation came from Alan Warner's text, by the way. Tom York used a similar method for Kid A, either obscuring the linear progression of the story or affecting his own voice. He divorced the idea of the self from the material. Exactly what Can wanted to do. Tago Mago was like the blueprint for this. There's always a new thing to pick out in Oh Yeah. The minimal bass line, the layered guitars. The fact that we end on the same groove we started on. It fades out, making this song seem like it goes on forever, and we just pass through it for 7 minutes or so. Taking up all of side 2 is another infinite song on Tago Mago, Hallelujah. This thing gets meta. If you listen to what Damo might be saying, some lines in Hallelujah point to being about the recording of Tago Mago itself. It's my recording station, man, but I record in his head. Songs they must appear where I am singing. Mushroom Head. Oh yeah. Paper House. I went there before she could. It was a day like this. Hallelujah is a showcase of what you can weave in and out of the same groove, because save for that piano break, believe me, it is the same drum pattern. The drums begin to kind of swerve off their path as they're dubbed over a couple more times. This is most effective when Holger changes up his bass line to be a little higher up on the fretboard. A sheet of sound that resembles feedback cuts in at 2 minutes and 42 seconds. Heavily affected guitar that might better warrant the descriptor of searing, harsh, and noisy at some points, but squiggly and more viscous around 5 minutes and 58 seconds. I was surprised that the very consequential piano break, the one A Tribe Called Quest sampled.
As we kiss, I'm a flash forward well, took a trip to ATL, cooking in the kitchen.
It's only 20 seconds long. It starts at 4 minutes and 45 seconds and is over by 5 minutes and 5 seconds. That goes to show you how Tago Mago fucks with your perception of time. The entry of Michael's fiddle, the squeals and devilish trills is my favorite part. It's very familiar territory considering the viola drone extensively featured on our last album. Ermin's pretty fluttering keyboard around 9 minutes in turn into big swaths at 14 minutes. There's occasional Stockhausen bleeps and bloops. Every once in a while you'll hear Damo ad-lib. Whoa there, a mumble here. He's responding to the same stimuli as we are, listening to them. He kind of breaks the barrier between audience and music. That's another part of why Damo was such a great fit for Can. His vocalizations in the last minute and a half are what it sounds like when you're doing along to whatever instrumental you're listening to. At this point, 17 minutes in, f*** it. 18 minutes of Hallelujah works because Can saw all the possibilities laid out before them, every possible input, tried every one, and chased them to their logical end. In and out of this same space, cut and pasted together, this is Can's creative process in a song. I cannot imagine this thing ending after Hallelujah. Tago Mago would be an incomplete statement. Hildegard was absolutely right to urge Can and their label to consider a second disc. It's used to continue the more out there ideas on disc 1. Before I ever read about the weird shit that allegedly surrounded Can, I had some uncanny experiences with Tago Mago. I distinctly remember my microwave syncing up with Paper House. Then my oven got synced up with Hallelujah and I got seriously freaked out. The Tago Mago Island Crowley connection is just a rumor. Ohm is a much more direct link. Ehrman wrote it off, quote, "I had no interest in that sort of thing at all." But he can't get around this one so easy. This was Crowley's spelling of the sacred syllable Ohm. Holger recorded Ohm across 2 days of happenings in the studio. He specifically wanted to capture the downtime between songs and incorporate that into something. There's this oft-repeated story of Ehrman barging into a meditative improv by going ballistic and smashing a chair. I can't hear this happen, but around 3 minutes in, his throaty chanting begins. Ohm and the first track on side 4 are the love it or hate it of Tago Mago. I can't lie, I love odd shit like this. I'm into the mantic arts. I love the space between realms. It always reminded me of what Jimmy Page did with Lucifer Rising, another project I really like, which is really weird considering the obvious connection there. Ohm has the same weaving of textures as Hallelujah, but with no anchor. There's atmospheric plunks, looping hand claps 6 minutes in, the little kid babbling, the cello, or I actually think this might be a double bass played with a bow if the album credits are to be trusted. I love that. This is a great moment for percussion on the record with bells and some kind of wood thing at 8 minutes and 15 seconds in that sounds like the grinding of a lowering drawbridge. And of course, Ehrman's chanting, and the effects Holger slapped onto it. It's huge considering the natural reverb the inner space had, but it's fucking crazy how they got it to turn out. It ranges from a death rattle to this pained moan at 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Side 4 of Tago Mago, Peking O and Bring Me Coffee or Tea, are the two faces of Can. Peking, their most experimental, and Bring Me Coffee or Tea, the closest we'll get to a pop song on this album. Peking O is a very early use of a drum machine, but it's not always used for the rhythm, like that delightfully kitschy bop at 3 minutes and 15 seconds. It's more used for its sound. This is because the guys recorded this on the same day they bought said drum machine. It's very rare to hear virtuosos doing non-virtuoso things on a record. We're hearing the guys play with a new toy. I love this guitar texture rolling like a marble down an empty corridor. The organ drone elevates this to a new trance level. There's another cut and paste, 1 minute and 56 seconds foreshadows the rhythm we'll end the song on. Peking is the fullest spectrum of what Damo could do vocally. He whispers, he shouts, he lets out these angsty cries around 2 minutes and 15 seconds that are probably the most rock and roll thing he does on all of Tago Mago. But if you thought the babbling on Hallelujah was funny, you will be in stitches listening to Peking. He hiccups, laughs to himself, yelps like he's in pain, renders himself out of breath. He screeches like a wife chasing her husband out of the house. There's vague mumbling in what sounds like Japanese. Who fucking knows? He squawks like a bird, imitates a mosquito, blows raspberries, does his best poorly dubbed karate movie hi-ya. And he may or may not have inspired the voice of Donnie Thornberry. What I would give to see Peking O being recorded. I can picture Damo like running around the inner space, like popping in on different microphones to do this. If Peking O is your friends messing with you while you're on shrooms, Bring Me Coffee or Tea is the gentle come down. It sounds like something the Soft Machine might have done. It's jazzy and pastoral, sweet like incense. Holger's bass playing sounds like something I might hear on a Gabor Sabo record from the mid-60s. Damo goes for exotic and ecstasy with his voice. There's amazing drumming by Jackie. The bells are twinkling and hypnotizing. I love the intricate language Michael moves in on this track, on acoustic and electric instruments, and that's Tago Mago. Can are a totally unique experience among the artists I've covered on this series. They're 5 individuals who strip the idea of the individual. They abandon the rock star ego to reach what the kids today might call the flow state. We used to call it Zen. In this Zen, Can found their sound. I've called it the ancestral groove, the endless circle, a trance state. And like the other album I described as the ancestral groove, Tago Mago reaches terrifying density. To The Wire in 1993, Holger said, quote, "Can was at its best when it was sinister." This was reached by way of absolute commitment to the creative process, improvisation, and studio magic. You'd think those two things would be mutually exclusive, but they're not. It's spontaneous in a different way. Biba Kopp phrased it like this, quote, "The nature of its spontaneity brings anyone within earshot right up close to the metaphysical horror of existence, because it is constantly dissolving the certainties of form to reveal the churning, chaotic energies out of which it is created. This should be where all rock begins and ends and begins again. The endless circle, the ancestral groove." I mentioned Fluxus very briefly earlier on. Tago Mago is almost Fluxus, because I don't think I've ever heard the same Tago Mago twice. Insert my 433-bit here, right? The Hallelujah of the car ride in 2023 was different than the Hallelujah I heard in 2025, which was different from the Hallelujah I heard at my desk 6 months before. Not unlike The Island, this music is earthy and ancient, thick with vegetation, full of hidden caves to get lost in. Tago Mago is where all rock, in one way or another, begins or ends. It's the point at which you enter the endless circle and you never leave. Tago Mago is the most lucid sleepwalk you've ever had. My personal favorites off this one are The Whole Thing. We are starting this year off strong with a My Favorite is the Whole Thing album, and that is it! That was the first Vinyl Monday of 2026. That was Tago Mago. What do you think of this album? What do you think of Can? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday, Monday mornings at 11. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!